Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Smart Trucking Live. Glad you could all join us today. Rob C. Like your comment, I agree. Trucker Hershey, hey man, glad you could join us. Sandus Turner, hello sir. Muppet, blue skies and 24 degrees Celsius where you are. Well, I've got a bit of a song of woe. It's supposed to be 10 degrees and raining here. Instead, it's snowing like a bugger out there, just a blizzard, and the temperature's just dropping like a stone. Last time I looked, it was minus 10 already, and it's supposed to go lower, so the weatherman missed it again here. Demon Gamer, hey man, thank you for joining us. Walker Wade 44, hello from Dallas, Texas. Lovely country down there. Trucker Hershey, I don't think I would have liked it back then. Well, we're going to talk about that, but there was some good and some bad, and John Spencer just nails it here. I've been trucking for 5 years, but in talking with some of the older drivers, they've said that there's nostalgia. You got to remember the good things and forget the bad, and there is good and bad, so that's what you've got to bear in mind. TJ, hey man, the Bloody Dead's here. Riley's here. Good afternoon from Iowa. How are you guys doing, Dave, Kathy, and Nick? We're doing well, Riley. Thank you for asking. Fred Besmer. Good day, Smart Trucking team from Davenport. Which way are you headed, Fred? I hope you're headed into the good weather, whichever way you're going. But I can tell you right now, it's not that great here. Safe travels. Josh Super Duty is here. Toxic Angel. Glad you could all join us today. We got a few news items that I want to go through before we start the stream. The first one was, and it came as a complete surprise to me, that there is a truck recruiters annual awards dinner every year. Who knew that they had such a thing? A recruiters award dinner. I guess it's a big deal. You could have knocked me over with a feather, but the guy that actually won it is a recruiter for Covenant, and congratulations to him, I guess. I don't know why they'd give recruiters awards, but just the guys that managed to suck the most people in, I suppose. But the second runner-up in this contest was a recruiter for Sherwin-Williams, the paint manufacturer, and they're recruiting for their company fleet. And it blew me away because I would have thought a company like Sherwin-Williams, drivers would be lined up out the door to work there. A good company fleet like that, I'm surprised they even need a recruiter, but oh well. Next big thing in the news, AT&T had a massive cellular outage last week, knocked out ELDs all over the place because all sorts of them rely on the cellular network. Put all sorts of truck drivers in jeopardy because half of them, since 2017 didn't even know how to do paper logs, yet they got to have them when they get to the scales. No excuse, ELD down or not, got to have a log. So left a lot of guys in trouble there. The third thing in the news today was this poor old fellow that got sick and must have passed out at the wheel and ran through the welcome area in Georgia off I-95 there. Tragic thing. He died, killed 4 others when he entered the rest area at high speed. Just an awful thing. So my condolences to his family. That's, stuff like that happens on the road once in a while. It's unavoidable in a lot of cases, but it's still pretty sad nonetheless. So, into the trucking right now, and the live stream topic. Was it better then or now? And you get the perfect guy to talk about this because I'm an old guy, so I remember back then, and I know how it was trucking recently too. And I got to laugh at Rob C's comment. He says, that's a no-brainer. I started back in 79, and without a doubt, trucking was a lot better back then. And a lot of older guys feel that way, but I don't want people to get the wrong impression because we tend to forget about some of the bad stuff. And when I got thinking about it, it wasn't all roses and sunshine. I remember having to hand bomb 44,000 pounds of frozen meat on and off trailers, and that was no treat. And loading
your truck on top of the tanker.
Yeah, that's another thing. You used to have to manually load tankers. Like there was a spout that you'd had to stick into the top of the trailer to load the product. And in the wintertime, and I was doing that up in Edmonton, Alberta in the winter, and a lot of the time the temperature was like minus 40 Fahrenheit, plus a wind chill factor up there. And it took about an hour, and you had to hold the tap down yourself, and you damn near freeze to death. And I sure as hell don't miss that. The trucks back then weren't in the same league for comfortable as what the new ones are now. So that was something that was, people tend to forget. But the old trucks, the heaters didn't work that great. They rode rough. The old transmissions, like the Spicer transmissions, man, if you missed a shift on those things, one could kick back and damn near break your wrist. Or the Armstrong steering, if that swung back, man, that could hurt you too. There were some things about the old days in trucking that weren't great. We all had to change our own tires because back then we were all running tube tires. There were no tire services where we were trucking, and we had to, carry our own spares and change our own tires, and that was no big deal. But, it took a chunk out of the day, and in lousy weather, that was no fun, getting underneath the trailer and pumping it up with a little hand jack. It could be kind of miserable, and man, I worked for Trimac back in the day, and they had cab-over Freightliners, and they were cheap to buying their trucks, and they wouldn't insulate the trucks at all. And in the winter, in those cab-overs for Trimac, you damn near froze to death. I used to go out on runs in the wintertime in those cab-overs wearing a snowmobile suit. It was that cold in the truck, because any heat at all that you got out of the motor, you had to focus on the windshield, or you couldn't even keep the windshield clean. But, man, there was no heat in the cab. Turn the bunk heater on, didn't matter. Those old things were cold, and I'll never forget that. And the old trucks, they tended to overheat in the summer. Most of them didn't have air conditioning. So, there were lots of things that we tend to look back now and go, oh, man, it was great back then. But there was some stuff you got to remember. Now, I will say back in the day, we weren't rushed at all. We just kind of got there when we got there. All they ever asked of us was that we get there safely and in one piece with the load in good shape. We could take our time, take as much time as we needed. They were just concerned with getting the load there safe. There was no scheduling, and there was no detention time at docks waiting for hours and hours and hours to unload. When we bumped the docks, they offloaded us. It was just as simple as that. There was no waiting around. So we didn't have to worry about waiting time back then. So, there were a lot of perks too. We made a lot better money because the cost of living was so much lower. The fuel was cheap. Everything cost so much less. And the freight paid better. The trucks were cheaper. The insurance was cheaper. The plates were cheaper. And we made some serious money back in the day. And I do miss that about trucking. I don't think that's coming back. But back in the day, boy, we made some serious good money. And it was nice because we all worked really hard. But the result of working hard was a really substantial paycheck at the end of the week or the end of the month. And, that made it all worth it, for us. So there were some things that were pretty good about back in the day too. Something else that was good about back then was that there were no ELDs. There were no cell phones even. So there was no micromanagement by the carrier. Henlo, back then, the monopolies would create more jobs, overall driving prices down, less cheating prior to technology. People had to work for it. These days, people create money by hacking. Yeah, it's a different world, isn't it? It's a different world. That's really true. But the micromanagement, like I was saying, you didn't have any of that. You carried a roll of dimes and you called in once a day to let them know you were alive and well and on track for delivery. But that was all you had to do. And they didn't bust your butt. They just said, okay, good. Call me tomorrow if you get a chance. Back in the 80s, I'd stack frozen box beef to save $75 from hiring a lumper. Yeah, absolutely. Because even back then, lumpers were a big thing even back then, and they were far too expensive back then. So, and we'd do the lumping ourselves, and we'd floor stack everything to save the weight of the skids. And a lot of times they wanted you to buy the skids. So everything was hand bomb on the floor. TJ, I had a neighbor growing up in the 70s and 80s that drove truck, and I remember him saying that he made nearly $100K a year. Yeah, like I say, the wages were significantly better back then. Truck drivers were upper middle income class workers back in the day. We all had our own homes, a new car every couple of years. We bought new trucks and trailers every few years. There was always money. There was never any shortage of money, and I miss that about trucking. Now it's almost like a starvation job.
Joel coming in with a tenner. Thank you very much for that, my guy. Good to see you in the chat this afternoon. What do you think of truck stops charging drivers to park? You actually did a short not too long ago on our channel about this. Any thoughts and comments on that?
I can see both sides of that. When they first started doing that, I was outraged. But the trucking industry has changed so much. The truck stops used to be able to rely on the revenue that they got from the fuel purchases and the purchases from the restaurant and stuff like that. These days, it seems almost everybody eats in their trucks, and they'll just run to the cheapest spot to fuel wherever that is. So truck stops, paving and buying real estate is hugely expensive. And I can see now, in this day and age, the need for them to be able to charge for those spots, because, to have a team roll in, not spend a dime, grab a couple hours sleep, and then take off again. They haven't made a red cent, yet they provided safe parking for the truck. So, no, I can see both sides of it. But initially, I thought, oh, man, what is the world coming to? Because that was unheard of back in my day. Read that one already. Yeah. Trucker Hershey, I think you probably would have liked it back then. Like I'm probably sounding like a bit of a whiner when I'm talking about the hand bombing and stuff, but really, you'd spend half a day hand bombing the load on, and then you'd be on your own, free as a bird for the next 4 or 5 days, depending on where you were going. It was a pretty relaxing lifestyle. There was no pressure from anybody. Riley, hey Dave, I wish truckers could drive how long they want and not be monitored. That was one of the best things about trucking back in the day. There's, you looked for a phone booth in the morning, called in, and you heard nothing from anybody until you called them again the next day. Fred will remember. Hand bombing was the norm, but it kept you in shape. Yeah, it did. And, it wasn't as bad as it sounded. When I look back on it now, I think, God, I'd probably have a heart attack after a load of boxed beef, but it did keep you in shape. It wasn't as bad as what it sounds. And, sometimes you lucked out and got a load of pillows or something stupid that wasn't heavy at all. So it wasn't all bad.
Daniel Meredith Jr., my guy, good to see you in the chat this afternoon. Thank you very much for the $5. Electric yard horses are good for warehouse or terminals, not for trucking. Electric trucks have a long way to go. Thank you very much for the $5, Daniel.
Yeah, Daniel, I will agree with that. I would agree. Hey, Craig Beats is here. Hey, Craig, thank you for joining us. He says, I can't stand the e-logs limiting the profits. They do that, and I'm not sure that they're keeping us safer. And that was the whole intention of the thing. And ever since they mandated the e-logs, the death rate for truck drivers has gone up every year. So clearly, they're not saving our lives. They're just more of an annoyance and a monitoring system. TJ, did the old school trucks create any back problems for you today? I've got back problems, but it wasn't from the old trucks. The old trucks probably didn't help my back, but no, I actually broke it in an accident that was unrelated to trucking. But yeah, the old cab overs, boy, with the spring ride and camelback suspension, they just kick your butt all day long on a bad highway. So, but yeah, all sorts of guys did have back trouble, just strictly from the trucks. When I first started driving trucks back in 1986, I worked for a supermarket chain in Boston that still had swinging beef runs. And boy, oh boy, if one of those hides fell off the hook, good luck luck picking it up. Michael, I hauled hanging beef for a number of years, and we figured at one time the average carcass weighed about 262 pounds, as I recall. And it wasn't too bad if, it was already on the hook on the roof of the trailer and you were picking it up like this. But if you dropped it and then had to pick it up off the floor and throw it over your shoulder, yeah, that was a treat. That was a treat. Now, Muppa points out that back in the day, there were no driver-facing dash cams either. And that was certainly a good thing because, there were, in fact, I was thinking about it the other day. I ran a lot of reefer freight. And now they have tachographs that they will throw in the trailer to monitor the temperature of the load, just to make sure the reefer doesn't quit or it swings up and down. And they're very cautious about, the swing and the temperature for the loads for refrigerated stuff. And back in the day, we had none of that. So the old reefers were noisy old buggers. So, and Fred will remember Canyon Distributors. I worked for Canyon Distributors back then. And we would just shut off the reefer at night because they were so damn noisy. We wanted to get a good night's sleep. We'd just shut off the reefer. So we'd sleep 4 or 5 hours. If you had a good trailer, the box would hold the temperature anyway. Then we just fired up in the morning. But if you ever did that with a tachograph on board in the trailer these days, they'd hang you out to dry. There'd be a big problem with it. Where am I here? Even if you drive under 150-mile radius these days, you still need an e-log if you're crossing state lines. You can't keep taking deliveries legally. I don't think I knew that, Craig, but yeah, it's the new trucking now is so highly monitored, and I think it takes away from the trucking, and there's so many regulations, and they're coming up with new stuff all the time. It's almost like these days they run out of rules to think of, so they sit down and think up some more stupid rules, whether we need them or not. Seems just a ton of them, and they don't really solve any problems or make us any money. But there's always something new coming down the pike, and look at the speed limiter issue now that they want to implement. Like, that'll serve no purpose at all. All that'll do is just tick off everybody, and thousands of guys will quit over that. We've already got it up here in Ontario, and it's just a pain in the butt. But I was sorry to see the states getting interested in that, but I guess that's what they're going to try to do. Which pay system cultivates the most safe drivers? That's from Keith. Paid by the hour is the best system for safety, because then you're never rushed or pushed by anybody. It's when you rush that accidents happen, or when you're sitting in traffic when you shouldn't be, and the four-wheelers are whipping all around you, you're just like a target. It's so I think pay by the hour is the best, but you can usually only get that doing local work. There is a company in Quebec, I can't remember the name of them off the top of my head, but they pay, even their long haul guys, they pay by the hour, and I think that's the way it should be everywhere. Do you think trucking sounds better back in the day, or are you happy with trucking today? Little survey we've got going here. It's a poll. Please vote one way or the other. See how you feel about that, whether you thought it was better then or whether you think it's better now. And there's, like we're talking about here, there are advantages to both. So, what are here? Here's a good question. The conditions of the Indiana roads worse now or back in the day, or they're the same? I think Indiana's actually better now, but Pennsylvania always holds a place in my heart for having some of the roughest highways that I've ever been across. And then, you get down into New Jersey and you just got to hang on to your dentures down there. But no, I don't think Indiana is the worst offender for that. But let's face it, all the highways are starting to fall apart, and they really haven't kept up with maintaining the highways. And it's not like the interstate system was ever like super smooth, coast to coast, because every state handled it differently. But for the most part, I'd say the roads are worse now than they were back in the day. Was union representation big in Canada when you drove truck? Yes, it was. When I was just talking earlier about driving cab over Freightliners for Trimac, and we were unionized. That was the only union job that I ever had. But we were unionized drivers at Trimac, and you don't see a whole lot of unions today, but they were more of a thing back then.
We had a union dock at Atlantis.
And yeah, Kathy points out at one of the carriers that I was an owner-operator for, that there was a union dock. Here's Fred. No need for new rules or new regulations, just enforce the ones on the books. Already, if safety was the objective, we'd be paid by the hour, no rushing involved. Completely agree with Fred there. But yeah, yep, no rushing involved, and that's the safest way to travel. Do you recommend getting into the industry right now, Rena? I would if you could find the right carrier, and that's the trick these days, is finding the right carrier to work for. And I understand the way the system pretty much works these days, that just about everybody has to start with a mega carrier just to get their license. Just it seems to be the easiest path to get your CDL, and then they stay for a year and then quit. And the trick is these days to get a little bit of seat time, a couple of years experience, and then start applying to the top carriers and working for one of these top carriers, because that's where you'll make the money. That's where you'll be treated the best. You'll earn respect. You'll have good equipment, but you've got to put in a little bit of seat time there. And then once you get into those good carriers, then it's a good job for a lifetime. But the course to getting there can be a little tough sometimes, I think. But yeah, I'd still recommend getting into trucking. But, you've got to put in your time before you find a good job. A couple of years anyway. Oregon had some pretty good interstates. Where did that go? I would rate them a B. Yeah, you know what, TJ? And Oregon's interstates are still pretty good. They're pretty damn smooth compared to a lot of places. I would agree with you. The interstates in Oregon were some of the best kept in the country. Arizona and New Mexico is now brutal. That's Fred. I'm sorry to hear that, because it's been a few years since I've been down there, but when I used to pull out of Yuma, it was actually pretty good down there. But I'm sorry to hear that's depreciated. Here's Z-Bear. Hey man, how are you? I was wondering, for the future, would you recommend buying an older used truck, or for a starting driver once he gets some time in the business? I like the older trucks way more. Z-Bear, that's a really good question. And if you're going to be an owner-operator, you've got to bear in mind now that some states you just can't operate an old truck in anymore, like California. But if you live in the right state, someone that's not got a hair up their wussy about emissions, I'd go for the older truck all day long. It's easier to pay for. It's faster to pay for. You don't feel the pressure to have to work the damn thing every day to make a $4,000 a month truck payment. If you've only got like a small truck payment, or the thing's paid for, it helps when you look at the cost of fuel these days and you think, my God, but you wouldn't want to have a huge truck payment on a new truck and then be buying fuel for it these days. It would break just about anybody. So yeah, I would go the older truck route all day long. What else should I say about back then as compared to now? I mentioned this earlier too, and I worked because there was no way to track and monitor the trucks. When I worked for Canyon delivered primarily meat everywhere, fresh and frozen, and we would run trucks down to California, but a lot of the guys seemed to get lost in the casinos down there. I remember one guy, I can't remember who it was now, that got lost in one of the casinos for a week. And I phoned into Canyon one morning. I was down that way, And they said, well, listen, can you kind of stop in Wells and have a look around? I forget who it was. And they said, can you kind of look around for this guy? Because we haven't heard from him or seen him in a week. And they knew he was okay. They just thought, Jesus, like tell him to get going. But I laugh. But that kind of happened because nothing was a real rush. So if you needed to take a little time off or if you didn't feel well, you could just park it. But, this fella, he should have probably called into Canyon and said, I need a little time or something. But he hadn't done anything like that. And as far as Canyon was concerned, the truck had just pretty much disappeared. But there was that. So not much pressure.
Demon Gamer coming in with a 20. Demon, thank you very much for that. Very generous. Thank you so much. I was training was better back in the day. Do your research on the company because I work for a good mid-sized company. Glad to see you're happy with your job, Demon. Thank you very much for the 20.
Yeah, Demon, thank you for that. And training was pretty informal back then. Like you just kind of got in with an older guy that knew how to drive and you hung out with him and until you got it all figured out. And sometimes it took some guys six days and sometimes it took some guys 6 months. But it was better training back then, in my opinion, because you actually got to drive with an old guy that knew how to drive, and he was good at it, and I thought that was way better. Some of these trainers these days have got like 3 months driving experience. I can't believe they get away with that. Joel, hey, Dave, been 19 years since I last drove, but I kept my A license. Do you think I'd have to take a CDL course to be hired by anyone? That's a really good question, and part of it would be, Joel, I don't know whether that would be in the States or in Canada, where you are, which one. Here, if you've still got your A license in Canada, I would think not. In the U.S., I'm not sure whether they'd want you to do a new CDL course or not. But if you've kept your license up in Canada, no, they wouldn't require that of you because they'd been testing you.
It would be the company that would require you to update, and the company would do a refresher and a retraining.
Kathy points out that it would be the carrier that would make you want to update and retrain, and she's right about that. So, but good question. Yeah, Muppets. Truckers helped each other, and that was really true back in the day. If somebody broke down, and they'd coast to the side of the road, you'd see 3 or 4 or 5 guys coast in behind the guy that had broken down, and everybody would pitch in and help. And if you needed an alternator or whatever it was, somebody had it, and you could just it was much better back then. Now on the ELDs, nobody's got time to stop. They're afraid to stop, so everyone just kind of blows by. But half the time you can't even fix these new trucks by yourself anyway. Fred says, "Oh my God, $4,000 MTH truck payment. I can't imagine that pain plus the emissions money bullshit on top of that." Fred, we were talking to somebody. I guess it was my friend the Lettuce King, and he knew a guy that had just dropped literally $300,000 on a brand new Pete. That was just the tractor. The trailer, the matching trailer, was running about $100,500. So figure out the payments on that. Like it's, I don't even know what the payments would be. My math doesn't run that high, but it's just insane amounts of money. Just insane. And and the emissions equipment on top of that, $300,000 for the truck, $150,000 for the reefer, and you're going to have trouble with both of them because of the emissions equipment. So you're going to have downtime involved in that, expense half the time because nobody likes to pay warranty on emissions equipment because they just say, "Oh, you've neglected it." They come up with an excuse. So it's just an ugly circle. And that's my rant on new trucks. I've lost track of the poll over there. Where did it go? Oh, here it is. Do you think trucking sounds better back in the day? 66% said yes, and 33% said no. So, yeah, I would agree with the majority on that in the poll. So, but like I was saying, it wasn't all roses. But at the end of the day, it was a lot nicer. My first truck that I bought in 1984 was under $100,000. And we were just talking, a new one is like 3 times that much. Just, like it's hard to imagine. Because the freight hasn't increased in rate times 3. And the fuel has multiplied, the cost of fuel has multiplied exponentially. Insurance is now ridiculous. So it's just, I don't know how these new single owner operators can make money at it anymore. I'm sure some of the carriers still do all right. Even some of them are hurting. I saw that Swift Knight apparently had a bad year by their standards, which is, when something that size loses money, and Werner didn't have a great year. When something that size loses money in trucking, they've got to reconsider their position, because if you're trucking by volume and you've got 1 million trucks, that only goes so far. That doesn't generally always work out in the end, because you have so many unexpected costs that you haven't been able to anticipate. So I never understood the formula for big carriers doing that, but that's how they do it. Oh, good poll here. When did you start in trucking? 1970 to 1990, 1991 to 2010, or 2011 to 2024? That's a good poll. I'll be curious to see the results of that one. Good question. What else do we got here? Jonathan, seems like everyone is too lazy to reply, or they're on their phones. It's more of the first. Yes, and CBs, like, yeah, nobody seems to use a CB anymore. Man, we couldn't leave the block without those things because we use them for everything. Luso, I hope you and your family are doing well up in Canada. They need to incentivize the trades, such as the CDL. And some people can't even afford to fork out the thousands, or even for bank loans. That's true. And, that's part of what they've got right in the States, because a lot of these guys don't have the money for CDL school, so the big carriers will train them. Now, some of the big carriers soak you badly for the training, and some of them are pretty fair. So you've kind of got to do your research. But up here, carriers aren't allowed to train their drivers. So you've got to go to a trucking school. This is Ontario I'm speaking of. And you've got to get your license and then hope you get hired. But in the meantime, up here in Ontario, you'd lay out between $10,000 and $15,000 just to get the license. And then you still got no experience. So it's ugly up here for a guy trying to get into trucking. Johnny Quest, I could change out an injector on an N14 blindfolded. X15, you'll be making a call. Yeah, we didn't have computers to repair our engines and change the codes and stuff. The motors were a whole lot more simple, and we could work on the engines. These days, you've got to pretty much have an iPad and gone to MIT to figure out what your motor's doing sometimes, and some of them are just a nightmare to try to keep track of. So yeah, we didn't have any of those worries. So
the nice thing about computers is they let you go live on YouTube. Speaking of which, TJ, thank you very much for the tenner. Always a pleasure watching your live feeds. TJ, thank you so much. That means a lot. Thank you very much for the 10.
Hey, thank you, TJ. Appreciate it. JF Trucker, hello, doctor of the trucking salute. Of trucking. Salut. Oh, okay, I get it. I didn't see the exclamation point in there between. Well, hello, man. How are you? Glad you could join us today. Joel says, yeah, some carriers soak you bad for what they call training. Yeah, and some of the training isn't worth the time it takes. Here's Stebbs. Hey, man, how are you doing? CBs seem to be only for gravel and road work guys. I have a CB in my Volvo, but I think I used it once when an oversized buy came the other way. Yeah, it stabs over here. I don't know when CBs fell out of fashion, but it was just within a couple of years, we went from everybody having a CB and monitoring it all the time And then all of a sudden, I don't know, sometime in the 2000s, everybody just kind of quit listening to them. And, I guess a lot of guys got satellite radio then, and a lot of guys chose to use their cell phones for entertainment. But that was why we didn't have these multi-truck crashes like you see in Wyoming these days. Back then, we were all on the radio, and we knew what the weather was doing up ahead of us. Now everyone's on their cell phones playing, and they just drive into a whiteout and crash into one another. It amazes me. Here's Chad. I just started driving 2 days ago over the road for a mega carrier. Got my license in August 2023. Been watching now for almost 2 years. Just got to learn from others' experience. Chad, that's the best way to learn, or to try it yourself. Like, listen to others that have done it, or try it yourself, rather than rely on some safety guy that claims to know what he's talking about. Half the safety guys I ever encountered in my career didn't even know how to drive trucks, yet they were safety guys. And I don't know, God, what they were thinking. Why would you have a guy like that for a safety guy? I guess he had a diploma in safety, but CB seems to be like a requirement for running Northern Ontario, yet most people seem not to run one, or will run off with it, or run with it off. Yeah, it's, like in a place in Northern Ontario, they're pretty much invaluable because there's not a whole lot of communication. There's often not a whole lot of traffic. And it's nice to know what's going on the highway in front of your, how far the next truck stop is, and food and fuel, because they're far apart spaced up there. So it's a handy tool. I would say 2013, when I quit trucking, is when CB started to get hardly used. 2013. Okay, Glitchy, appreciate that. But yeah, I didn't really, keep track of the exact year that I noticed it, but it was something that just kind of faded away, and it was a big loss as far as I was concerned. JF Trucker, thanks, man. I'm sweating. It's hot here in Florida. That's it. Rub it in. When I started hearing Polish, or a few years ago some Russian, that's when I turned it off. It's generally, I found that, and there were influxes of immigrants, but generally I found that they found their own channel. So it was never really an annoyance as far as I was concerned, because they were always on a different channel. And honestly, most of us back then ran like big ham radio sets. So we all had our own channel anyway, far and away from channel 19. So that was never really an issue for me. I'm thinking of a Lettuce King story. Canadian Skilled Truckers Alliance. Dave, do you remember when companies gave dinners and awards for accident-free years? Yes, I do. Now that you remind me of that was a long time ago. It's man. Well, I've been running my own authority for a long time now, so I didn't get that. I never threw myself parties or something. But back, I remember one company. I won cleanest truck of the year award one year, and
the only nominees were himself, unfortunately. And the guy who picked the winner was again himself.
No, that's not how it went. I was one out of like 36 guys, and I won the cleanest truck award. But yeah, you don't. Kathy's laughing at me here, but that helped us finance a trip to Hawaii. So I don't know if it helped me finance my end of going to Hawaii anyway. So I was pretty happy with it. Muppet says he's always got his CB on here. So, Muppet, are they more commonly used in Australia? I hope so, because Australia's got some big open country too, and you'd sure want to have some form of communication. Here, Stab says, in Europe, hands-free earpiece has been the norm for 15 years. Yeah. We've got well, I guess earpieces are becoming more popular, but for a while, everyone I saw was running these pilot type headphone sets, and I thought they looked stupid, but everybody else seemed to like them. But and I hope they graduate to earpieces here. TJ says, no reward dinner now. Now you get a sticker. Do drivers and companies ever do rodeos?
They do them in Ontario annually.
There are rodeos, few and far between still, that go on. I remember back when we were running cross country, the really big one, the national one, was often in Denver, Colorado, and guys would come from all over, and they just bring whatever truck they were driving, and that was a big thing back, God, in the 60s and 70s. But yeah, they still do rodeos in some places. A lot of the rodeos now seem aimed at more company drivers, but yeah, they still do them. Do you think now is hard for owner-operators to make money, Bernardo? It is very hard. Very hard now for owner-operators to survive. And in tough times like this, if you own your own truck and you're running your own authority, you're almost better to go to a really good carrier and lease on with the carrier. Because at least they can find freight better than you could as a single guy. And I hit a couple of times in recessions with carriers that kept me fed and kept me making money, because sometimes the freight would just vanish. There's something else I have to say about what was better back in the day. Back in the day, there were hardly any load brokers. There were load brokers in produce, a few of them, so we dealt with those. But nowadays, there's load brokers for everything. And it blows me away how many of these carriers rely on these load brokers. And it's made some load brokers filthy rich. Like, it's unbelievable how much the industry now relies on load brokers. I think that's a serious mistake. But it's a fact these days. I think that's wrong. I can't find the poll right now here. Chad says, how do you wise truckers budget plan for time off work for more than a few days at a time? That's tough, because these days when you're watching your dimes and nickels, you've got to budget, and a lot of guys now are literally afraid to take time off. They're afraid to lose contact. They've got to keep going. They do their reset and they go right back out because they don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. So, yeah, good question. I don't see the poll up on my screen. So, here it is. So when did you start trucking? Here's the poll results. 52% started trucking between 2011 and 2024. 28% started trucking from 1991 to 2010. And the old guys watching, like me and Fred, 18% of our audience today started trucking between 1970 and 1990. So, interesting poll. Huh. More than half are fairly new drivers. Trucker Hershey. Do all switches on a CB in Australia turn the other way? Good question. I wouldn't have never thought of that. Here's Luso. When I drove a fuel tanker, we always had our Peterbilts washed and waxed clean. Thanks to AB5 in California, my brother-in-law had to give up his owner-operator fuel truck business. Yeah. I'm sure you're all aware that Biden's got like a federal form of AB5 that's going to start here in the States March 11th. And that's just going to create havoc like you wouldn't believe. And I've read through the rules, and it's kind of a wishy-washy standard, in my opinion. And, some of the states will be exempt from the federal rule because they've got their own state rule, which overrides the federal rule, like California, for instance, is an example. But it's going to be a mess, and it's going to be interesting to see what comes of all of that. So TJ says, yeah, like ABF and UPS have rodeos. Of course that's right. I never even thought of those guys. Let's make another poll. How many of you agree with the general public work over 40 hours for no extra pay is like us truckers? That's interesting you mentioned that, Glitchy, because part of what this new legislation may end up doing is if enough of these independent contractors are reclassed as employees, there's going to be a huge push for those truck drivers to be recognized by the Fair Labor Standards Act, which will get them overtime, which is something that has long been missing from the trucking industry. So it'll be interesting to see how this all works out. But yeah. Here's Stabs again. I wouldn't wear the big headphones if I got one. The earpiece also protects the hearing on one ear only, though. Years of disconnecting the dual-matic airlines. Notice the hearing got worse. Yeah, there are jobs in trucking that do hurt your hearing. And back in the day, before air conditioning, we all drove with the windows down in the summer because you pretty much had to, just to keep cool if you were down south. And I know that affected my hearing. My hearing is worse in my left ear than in my right, and I'm sure that's the reason why.
All right, well, we've talked a good bit about why it was good back in the day, but now that we know that, 50% of our viewership is at least started within the last 10 years, maybe we can go over a little bit why it's good now, and perhaps Chad can help you out with a few reasons of why that is now.
Absolutely, and there are some good things, and the first thing that comes to my mind are how much nicer the trucks are these days. Like, the trucks ride so much better. They're so much more comfortable. The air conditioning works well. The heating works well. They turn far more easily. Power steering's been a huge thing for the trucking industry. But even like the setback axle concept really helped trucks maneuver. So there are some real advantages. But the first one, I think, are the fact that the trucks are so much nicer. And as much as I've slammed the electronic communication systems, there have been times when they've been a godsend. Like, you get to an accident situation that's really bad, you can just get on your cell phone and get help like right away. Whereas before, that wasn't ever possible before. And you can run into a major crash in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming, and have a helicopter there, a helicopter ambulance there in minutes. And sometimes, you had to drive 100 miles to a payphone to get a hold of anybody if the cops didn't stumble over you back then. So that's a huge advantage. The communications can be annoying, but they can be a lifesaver. They can be a godsend then, and that's really important. Because if it saves lives, how much more valuable could it get than that? So that's a definite advantage of modern day trucking. Something else that I hesitate to mention, but I believe it to be true, is that there's rigorous drug testing these days for truck drivers, and I think that's a good thing, and that was not the case back in the day. And you would run into the occasional burnout that shouldn't have ever been on the highway. And these days, I think that's much better patrolled, and I think that's a good thing too. I for the most part on the interstate, I see more police, and I think that's a good thing. Some guys don't like it, but speeding's not really an issue for most of them anyway. They're just there to help and come to accident scenes and stuff. I'm a supporter of the police. I think a bigger police presence is a good thing, and that wasn't always the case back in the day, because some of those states are huge, and they'd only have a few officers to cover hundreds and hundreds of square miles. And I think that's improved, and I think that's a good thing these days. We have better police protection and coverage, and God, just not only on the interstates, even around the truck stops and stuff, which was never an issue back in the day before, or rarely. But these days, with crime up everywhere, it's good to know there are more police minutes away from just about every truck stop you'd land at. So I think that's a good thing too. There are advantages. I think carriers went through a transition because when deregulation hit, all sorts of big carriers started up and they took terrible advantage of their drivers. And I think that has slowed down to a certain extent because people have become more aware of human rights violations. And, that's one thing the ELD has helped with is they can't run their drivers like dogs anymore because, back in the day, if you were like a nobody at a big carrier, some of those big carriers would run you like a dog, and they didn't care if you slept for days at a time. It's, and some guys crashed because of that. They were so concerned about losing their job that they would just keep going and going and going and going and going. That was not a good thing. So, I was a supporter of the ELD when it first came in because I thought that the main purpose of this thing would be to make sure that everybody didn't run until they were burnt out, that the FMCSA was going to monitor this and make sure that everybody got a good night's sleep. Of course, the carriers have screwed that up, but I still, think that the idea behind them was well-intentioned. So, and we didn't have anything like that back then, so that's a good thing. But on the other hand, there were guys like me that only needed 3 or 4 hours sleep a night. So if I was out on the road, why not truck? So I would sleep 3 or 4 hours and then go trucking again. And I covered a lot of distance and I made a lot of money because I covered a lot of miles because I didn't need a whole lot of sleep. So that was kind of nice. And you can't do that today, but it's probably a good thing. And now that I'm older, I appreciate the fact that the ELD would shut me down after 10 hours of driving in the States or whatever the heck it was, or 11 hours. I even forget, it's been so long for me. But yeah, it would make you park. So all you had to do was pick, I'm going to start this time of the morning because I want to be done at dinner time, walk in, have a decent meal, and then a full night's sleep. So I appreciate the ELD for that.
Here's a big one from Trucker Hershey. Better info available to people. The internet has helped, and not only with everyone and their dog has access to a map on their phone now. Not only that, but you get access to channels who will advise you in the directions of good carriers, for example, such as this one. But yeah, the internet, just a massive, massive advantage for everyone now when it comes to the trucking industry.
Kathy and I were talking about that just this morning. It's the greatest resource tool that there has ever been. You can find out literally everything now because of the internet. Here's Fred. Pilot and Love New Drivers Starter Kit is a pair of flip-flops, less gloves, and a headset. Fingerless glove. Where does it say that? Oh, yeah, fingerless gloves and a headset. Oh, man. I've been following the takeover of Pilot here, Fred. I don't know if you have been or not, but it's been kind of interesting, the financial wrestling that the two of them have been doing. But Berkshire Hathaway seems to have won out, which is a good thing. Johnny Quest. My brother-in-law had 3 licenses pre-CDL. Yeah, in the States you could do that. You could have different licenses from different states. And there was no way back then to really check it either. So sometimes that was good and sometimes that was bad. But the other thing was that the scales couldn't communicate electronically. So if you got stopped in Nebraska, Wyoming didn't know that you'd been stopped in Nebraska. And sometimes that really helped out. You could just kind of keep going because the scales weren't in touch with one another. In the states, the state DOTs weren't in touch with one another. Like you could bluff your way through sometimes when you had to. Yeah, Stab says, if you don't have anything to hide, what's the problem with law enforcement? I agree. And then, yeah, you shouldn't have anything to hide. And I've found, I know there can be good cops and bad cops. My personal experience is that I've never really run across a bad cop. I've run across cops sometimes in a bad mood. But generally, if you spoke to them civilly and treated them with respect, then they calmed right down. But no, I've been a big supporter of law enforcement. I continue to be to that day. Fred, drivers could sure have used CBs last night over Elk Mountain, Wyoming. Did they get a blizzard there, Fred? They must have. So I know now that Fred is heading east, but. Yeah, I guess Wyoming continues to have storms, but I never minded a storm so much in Wyoming as long as you were parked, because then the wind would howl and just rock the truck back and forth. Oh, sleep like a baby. Anyway, I'm not even going to read that next one. Grateful Trucker. I'm sure you're talking about the CB dials. I competed in a truck rodeo when I worked with BFI Waste Systems. It was so much fun. I imagine that's TJ. I imagine they would be fun. I've never done that myself, but I imagine that could be a good time. To do that with other truck drivers that did the same type of trucking with equipment as you did. I bet you that could be fun. 53 step. Carriers are like zero help anymore. They don't care if you work or not. They are just waiting for your deductions. Yeah. So there are good carriers out there that still care, but I know you got to go hunting for them these days. You wouldn't ever count like the mega carriers in there. You wouldn't count CR England or Swift or Werner or any of those guys. You'd kind of have to look for the middle-sized carriers before you get any respect and decent pay as a company driver anymore. Carlos says, everybody has a map, but not everybody knows how to drive. Isn't that the truth? And you know what? I'm not even sure everybody still carries maps anymore. I think everyone is so reliant on the GPS systems now that I always had both, because I thought, and I would check my GPS directions against what I saw on the map, and then I would still call the receiver and just match the three of them all together. And by the time you did that, if there was a road closure or a low bridge anywhere, you knew about it. So I worked very hard at not getting lost. I hated being lost. So I was just reading Walker Wade here. CRST stands for completely rebuilt Schneider truck. Thank you for the two, Walker Wade. I took Nick's thunder away there, but I appreciate the two. And CRST has had some of the biggest junk on the road. The last time I saw a CRST truck, they were still running old cab over Schneider trucks that they repainted that kind of gold color, and they look pretty damn rough. Roger Penske, hey man, you made it. Post trip with the Korean Mafia. Glad you could join us, Roger. How are you doing? Anyway, trucking, it's always had its good side and its bad side. When you put it all together, it probably pretty much balances out the same, to be truthful, because old guys like me don't remember necessarily the bad times. So, everybody tends to remember the good stuff. So, in all honesty, it's probably about 50-50. But I'm sticking to my story, though, about preferring it back then. So, but that's the deal anyway.
All right, chat. Well, that'll about do it for us today. I just want to take a second to give a thank you to our donors. For today, Joel, Daniel, Demon Gamer, TJ, and Walker Wade. Thank you to everyone who donated, and thank you to everyone else who came out and participated in the chat. Glad everyone could make it today. So I'll pass it back to Dave if he has any more announcements, and that'll do it for us today.
I do. Thank you all for joining us. We've got a smoking video coming out Friday about the 5 worst trucks. So make sure you stay tuned for that Friday. And, excuse me. Be sure to join our membership group if you haven't already. There are extra videos in the membership group that aren't available on YouTube or Facebook. So sign up for that and get to see my face more often through the week if you like that sort of thing. Anyway, take care. Thank you once again for joining us. Everyone have a safe night, a safe week out there. Drive carefully. And we'll see you on the back haul. Thank you for joining us.